Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday to you. And thank you for joining us today for our weekly trade and tariff briefing. My name is Matt Wonderly. I'm the Director of Investments with World Trade Center Utah. And again, I have the pleasure of facilitating today's conversation. If you're here for the first time, this weekly webinar series is intended to provide you with the latest information around trade and tariffs. You can view previous webinars on our YouTube channel and also find updates to our tariff dashboard on our website, which we'll link into the chat for you. Today, we're very excited to hear first, we're going to shake up the order a little bit. First from Rebecca Rodriguez. She is the Legislative Director for Representative Blake Moore, and she'll be talking about the ongoing government shutdown and its latest effect on trade. Then we'll pass it over to Ben Collender, our Chief of Staff at World Trade Center Utah, about some updates to the World Trade Center Utah tariff dashboard. And just for everyone to know, Rebecca may have to drop off, so if there are any questions, Ben and I will do our best to either answer them or get back to you later in case Rebecca does have to drop off. But Rebecca, take it away.
Wonderful, and appreciate you guys working around my flexibility. It's been a kind of crazy week. So if you're not reading the news, it's day 24 of the shutdown. And the good news is, I think on the tariff and trade front, a lot hasn't stopped. Things have continued on. I think we're seeing, for better or for worse with this administration, the trade power has been very condensed underneath the president himself and less the entire cabinet. And he continues to make a lot of decisions. We saw that last night with just deciding to stop all trade negotiations with Canada, and that we're still trying to understand what that means and how long that stop is going to be. That's something that we were just as surprised to see. But really what the shutdown means broadly is for every agency, but I think USTR is not immune to this. They're operating with less people. So they're at limited capacity but that's more on the administrative side. So as they're processing investigations and things like that, that's all going to be slowed. But when we're talking about these larger trade deals, that seems to still be happening. We haven't gotten any indication that has stopped. Also, and I'll try to be short so that I can take a couple questions. But also on the CBP side of things, they are continuing to process tariffs. They are continuing to manage imports and exports and collect revenue. So we haven't seen a ton of disruption. If you guys are seeing that, that would be great news or not great news, but that would be great to share with us so that we can try to communicate with the administration that we're hearing that from our companies. But so far, we haven't heard any major disruptions when it comes to the trade and tariff side. Just on what's going on and when we think this will be over, I wish I knew. I think we're increasingly seeing that the longer the shutdown goes, the more Democrats are willing to come to the table and talk about reopening. All of this is it's kind of turned into three things. One, the enhanced premium tax credits for healthcare. So the extension of the enhanced Obamacare credits. So to be very clear, even if we don't address it, the existing ACA credits continue. The only change that happens is that there is a cap at 400%. If you make more than 400% of the poverty level, you do not have access to those credits. The ACA credits stay. It's just the COVID extensions that would go back. And then Democrats have requested that we rethink our Medicaid changes that we made in the One Big Beautiful Bill. I think even they understand that that's a non-starter for us and not a real request, and we are not willing to negotiate on that. And just some of the federal worker and firings and things like that, which the congressman, my boss, would be very happy to talk about how we can get people back to work and get back people that have been fired. That is not something that we're supportive of at all. So that's kind of the three tranches. I think the biggest thing that's making the news is the ACA credits. And I wish I had a better sense of when we'll actually come together on that. I think Republicans understand that we're willing to negotiate on this, but not with a gun to our head. We want the government reopened before we can really have those conversations. Wish I had a better sense on timing. All federal workers are not receiving a paycheck, including myself and our team. The congressman has asked the clerk to withhold his pay because in some crazy world, we allow our members of Congress to still get paid during shutdowns. So he's withholding his. But that's kind of where we're at. Happy to answer any questions. I have about 10 more minutes, so I can dig deeper. I can do whatever.
We have a good one here for you, Rebecca. One quite specific. It says or asks, any movement on lowering the India tariffs on herbs or dietary supplement ingredients below the current 50%?
Not that I've heard of specifically, but I will. I'll have our staff reach out to USTR and Commerce on it and see if we can get a better answer.
We
Um,
also have some public things we can go over in the dashboard, but it wouldn't be that sort of behind the scenes sort of what does it look like moving forward besides what's public. But we have some of those updates we'll go over in the dashboard as well.
Perfect.
So anything, I think what would be, we're happy to address any trade related questions here shortly. So Matt, if we want to take even, shutdown or government operations and how that applies to some of the trade talks, I think that might be the best route for us.
Agreed. I'm curious about maybe the CBP and their limited capacity right now and how it correlates with our FTZ here in Utah and how that might affect maybe new companies that are looking to join the foreign trade zone here. What is there a timeline?
Yeah, I don't have a timeline on it. I think like CBP kept like 95% of their employees. They're still working, they're working without pay. So it shouldn't have a major effect on existing folks that are already in the FTZ. I do think that there's going to be a delay just because it's mostly administrative staff that was furloughed. And so really timeline is going to depend on when we come back. But if there are companies that are looking to join, right, and that are trying to look for that, reach out to us, and we can try to push things along even if they have a smaller staffing.
Brilliant.
I think that's probably my biggest thing is like if you're seeing something we might not know, so please reach out to us and I will put my email in the chat right now. Reach out to me, reach out to my colleague John. And I know he's done these before. And between the two of us, we can try to get the answer from. Oh, I guess I should put that into host and panelist. You all know where to find us. Ben can give our emails out and such.
We'll get that out to everyone participating today. I know Andrea is in the background working that and can send it to all hands. So
amazing.
One last quick question here, Rebecca, before you leave. Can you describe any sort of bullwhip effect in the supply chains or any ripple effects that might be happening due to restrictions on imports coming into Utah and how that might affect Utah companies?
Yeah, I mean, two things. One, we only know what you tell us on your supply chains. So I think, like I said, communicating that with us. I know the president has talked a lot about, different ways that companies can get, or ideas out there to get companies kind of not reimbursed, but I'm going to use that term for what they're paying on their supply chain and tariffs. And I don't know what that's going to look like. I think it's not the most popular on the Hill. I think there's some folks that I think there's some on the Democrat side that will say the president did this, like live with your consequences. I think there's some on the Republican side, my boss included, that are like, okay, the president did this, these companies did not. There has to be some sort of cushion. So all of those conversations are still happening and happening kind of behind closed doors. There's a lot of members that I think are growing increasingly concerned about the manufacturing supply chain. And there's kind of two buckets of concern. One, it's the ag side, and two, the manufacturing. And those offices have been getting together, in an unofficial, just kind of let's talk through what this could look like. But I don't see any movement on that actually happening until after we come back. It's kind of all eyes on the shutdown and trying to pull folks out of that.
Rebecca, in these trade talks, I wonder, or not trade talks, I'm sorry, in the shutdown discussions, I wonder if there's anything from your office that you're like, wow, just like, I wish our community knew this was part of the discussion, or this will impact in an outsized way and an outsized benefit. This is something we're standing up for that can help our community. Wonder if
Yeah.
there's any insights there you'd like to share.
I think a couple things. One, just the kind of the understanding that with all this conversation on the ACA credits, that we are not talking about taking away the Obamacare credits. This is for people, like there's examples in families in Arizona that make $600,000 and they are getting this subsidy. That is not who we think needs a subsidy. We want the subsidy to go to people that really need it to buy insurance. So just that kind of understanding that we're not talking about all of this subsidy going away. We're talking about the extension that was needed during COVID, and we're out of the pandemic. We can go back to business as usual. The other thing that, and I think this is very Utah specific, and I know my boss has talked a lot about this, we have a very disproportionate number of federal workers. There's about 40,000 federal workers in Utah. About 30,000 of those are in our district, with between the Hill Air Force Base and the IRS and all these kind of random other ones. That getting, like, my boss has never voted to shut down the government before, whether it was a Republican or a Democrat in the White House. We do not think that this is the way that you get what you want. This is not the way that you support the federal workers that we represent. So we are actively trying to have these conversations with the White House and with OMB on these rifts and the impacts that it's going to have on the communities. I think there was an article about Ogden and how the local restaurants are really suffering now because the federal workers are not going into work. That has been our biggest priority throughout this, is trying to support those workers and getting them back. The rifts are something that we were never supportive of. We were trying to get information from the White House early on what that would look like, and unfortunately didn't get as much information as we would have liked. But that has kind of become our number one priority throughout this, is like, yes, reopen the government, but also we need to think about the damage that we've done on the rifts, and this conversation about not paying federal workers back. Like, that is not something that we're going to be okay with. So that's kind of what we've been focused on in the shutdown. And I wish I had a better sense. If I had a crystal ball, my guess is that we see this for another week and a half. I think there's some messaging that the Democrats want to do that will come to a head at the beginning of November. And I think that we're kind of at that point. The more I look at polling, the more I see that the longer this goes on, the more people are blaming Democrats for this. So they're going to start getting a little bit more heat back home. I think we're down to like a 3-point margin, that only 3 points more blame Republicans for this, when it started at 17. So the longer this goes on, the more pressure that Democrats are going to feel. And I think that once they get their messaging win, I think we'll be in a better spot. But yeah, like I said, my biggest thing is tell us if you're seeing something on the ground that we're not. If there's specific issues that we can help with, and specific outreach that we can do, let us know as well, and we're more than happy to do that. As you guys know, John is like way deep in here, and he probably would have better answers than I do, just because he's like our trade wonk and I'm pretending to be for the day. But feel free to reach out to either of us.
A shred of optimism. That sounds great. We're
Don't hold me to it.
Yeah, hopefully inching toward a conclusion, but yeah, we won't hold you to it. Well, thank you, Rebecca. Really appreciate your time and insight here. And World Trade Center Utah on our end will keep you up to date with what we're hearing as well on the ground level. But thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Excellent. Well, that leaves us down to Ben Collender, our Chief of Staff, to walk us through some updates with the tariff dashboard on our website. Ben, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Matt. I share my screen like I always do. Here we are. So we talk about this every week, but this is our dashboard, wtcutah.com/tariffs. This is where you go to get the latest information on tariffs that we're tracking. We're going to just run through these updates one by one, and then we'll get to questions. I know we have a few questions already in the chat. We can get to those after the rundown. But the first is this morning, some news coming out of Canada. The United States has suspended trade talks with Canada over an ad that was placed. And there's some back and forth there. Essentially, a reminder: we do have USMCA with Canada, which is one of the most favorable trade deal around. USMCA compliant goods are 0%, but a lot of the trade talks are twofold. First, the 35% that we're looking at here for things that are not USMCA qualified, and second, we have an upcoming renegotiation for USMCA. It's a good plug to remind everyone we have open public comment on that, and you can find that on our dashboard. That is open until November 3rd. And so the two things are to bring down that 35% on non-USMCA goods and any renegotiation discussions for the 2026 renegotiation date. So those two things have been suspended. We were asked a lot about Switzerland last week. This is a part of the global IEEPA tariff. So I just threw in a line for Switzerland in our dashboard. So we made sure to cover it in these updates. There was some news announced. There's currently a 35% or 39% rate on Switzerland. You could see that there's some cautious optimism that a trade deal may be in effect or may be in the works. So Switzerland is actively working on what components could be in a trade deal for those discussions to bring down that tariff rate from the 39%. India was also asked about last week. India, there are some unconfirmed reports coming out as of yesterday that, or day before yesterday, that India is looking for a trade deal that could bring their rate down to 15 to 16% rather than the current 50%. Those are unconfirmed. Seems to be some positive conversations happening with India, and they're reducing their reliance on Russian oil as well. So stay tuned for more on that. But their baseline is 25% and then a 25% for Russian oil. So the assumption from what I can see is that that second 25% will be wiped out if they can become, compliant, so to speak, on not bringing in Russian oil. And then the first 25% as part of the global IEEPA reciprocal tariff would come down to 15 to 16%. We also saw some updates on Colombia. So they're without any specific tariff rate discussed. Colombia was accused of some harmful US efforts, and now we're tracking potential tariffs on Colombia. No specifics on dates or tariff rate yet, but we'll continue to track that. And then last week, we talked about some of the 232s on robotics and industrial machinery, as well as personal protective equipment and medical consumables, medical equipment. Those 232s right here that you can see are really depending on how aggressive the administration wants to be, how fast they want to define their checkboxes along the prescribed path to implement a 232. Could be anywhere between now and May 30th of next year. So we're going to continue to monitor those. As we hear announcements, we'll let everyone know. But those public comments closed on October 17th, so a week ago today. So we're tracking that as well. And as well, the public comment closed on automobiles and automobile parts. So anyway, I will stop sharing my screen. And I know we already have some questions, Matt.
We've got some questions. They're pouring in as we assumed they would. A lot of updates going on in the last couple of weeks. Ben, wonder if you can answer this one. Is World Trade Center Utah responding to USMCA consultation?
So there are really three forums to consider your comment for that. The first is you can submit a public comment on the Federal Register itself. Those comments would be public. The public could see them, and there are reasons that businesses may not want to do that. The second option is there's an option at the bottom of the Federal Registers when they're published to reach out, or sometimes it's contained within the body, to reach out to a staff member to privately submit comment. That may be the situation if you're worried about a supplier, or especially if it's a government-owned supplier, seeing some of your comment and you're concerned what they may think. So those are the primary two by which companies submit. But also, if you want to reach out to us, and Andrea can put our information in the chat as well. If you want to reach out to us to consider World Trade Center Utah compiling public comment and staking a position, we are open to doing that. The most influential comments come from individual business cases, but where it makes sense for us to do that, and we did this for the trade barriers report last year, opened up, took an intake, submitted something on behalf of other companies in Utah. We only got a few responses because most companies preferred to go route 1, route 2 on their own. So, we're always happy to do that at World Trade Center Utah, but we haven't seen a demand just yet for us to take that on, but always open to doing that.
Brilliant.
And maybe it's worth, Matt, before we jump into other questions, I should do a quick rundown of big dates coming up, because
that'd be great.
We've been doing this the last few weeks, and it brings to light, we do have public comment on the 2026 trade barriers report that's coming up. It closes on October 30th, which is next Thursday. So if you're facing trade barriers abroad for your product, it could be a high tariff rate on a reciprocal tariff from a foreign partner, or just a non-tariff barrier, like you can't get your product in for one reason or another. That's worth submitting, and that's linked on our tariff dashboard as well. You can go find it there. And so the Federal Register is linked there. You could submit comment, and the federal government will receive that and use that in their next iteration of considering how to bring down some of these tariff and trade barriers abroad. So that closes October 30th. We also are going to start to hear next week a lot of the drumbeat on the United States and China trade deal, or potential for a trade deal. We've seen, so there's a summit taking place, starts on Halloween, ends on November 1st. We've also heard that maybe the US is going to put 100% tariff in place on China starting on around November 1st. Coincidence there? Probably not. So it's positioning in all likelihood around negotiations for that discussion. So the current, as it stands, though, while we hinted at November 1st, while the talks end on November 1st, the real deadline right now is set to be on November 10th. That's when the truce is slated to end. It could always end earlier. And USMCA public comment, which we just discussed, it closes on November 3rd, as well as public comment for auto inclusion, the inclusion process, if you want to see a tariff included in what's being considered for autos and auto parts. The last thing I'm going to discuss is the Supreme Court is coming up for oral argument on November 5th. Hopefully we see a lot of what you never know if you're going to be able to see an outcome or not based on the oral argument, but the hope is that we'll have some sense of what that will look like in the future. So just to say, a lot of what we're hearing, there are some dates coming up that this group should be aware of that are very relevant. And if you are thinking about public comment, you should, whether it's public or submitted privately via email to USTR or BIS, you should consider those routes, because again, the government by statute has to consider these if submitted, every substantive comment. Now, if you just say, hey, these suck, you're not going to get really considered. But if there's substance there, the government has to consider it, and it gives some legal recourse down the road if you want to take suit of you don't feel like your comment was well considered. So anyway, or file suit. So anyway, that I know I went on a bit of a rant, but those dates, those considerations are really important as we have some these back and forth and questions coming through. So
Right. And that's helpful, Ben. Thank you for that information. And we've got some extensive questions here, and I would acknowledge you to, if it's quite lengthy due to our lack of time here or a limitation on time, do reach out to us directly in the emails provided from Andrea in the chat. But maybe we can answer a little bit of this in the time that we have, Ben. Have we seen a delay in FTZ production authority approval? And it's a much lengthier question, but I think the gist of it is, have we seen any delays in production authority approvals?
well, what we heard from Rebecca, which is so helpful, is that, and we're going to take her up on this offer, is that any delays to reach out to her. We are, there are two ways to think about the foreign trade zone. The first is active approved users now. Those users are seeing very little impact because, as we said, Customs, who is the main enforcement body, is really not furloughed for the most part. Now, the part of commerce that is furloughed, or the part of the FTZ that is furloughed, is part of the Department of Commerce called the Foreign Trade Zones Board. So we're getting bounce back emails. That group is most relevant for new applications. So if you're talking about production authority for a new application, it's likely to be delayed during the shutdown. And my crystal ball would say even after the shutdown, you're going to have lengthier timelines as federal employees catch up on the backlog. And so I think for new applications, whether it's production authority or distribution, you're likely to see some sort of delays. Time will tell on if that's true or not, or how long that will be, but I do anticipate we're going to see some of those. But as Rebecca said, those are things that we're going to flag for Blake Moore's office as well, and see if they could be helpful, or other congressional delegations, not just Blake Moore. So.
And just keep in mind, November 7th session will be an extended 1-hour briefing, just so you know, not 30 minutes, but November 7th will be a full hour. We can extend and answer and dive deeper into certain questions. But
Can I take that for a minute? So that is very specific on our end for a few things. The biggest being the Supreme Court oral argument. So we're going to be discussing that in greater detail and have a back and forth. So we'll have reviewed what those comments and discussion points are, and be able to bring that to this group to sort of be able to have some sort of a crystal ball, is the hope, of what this will look like going forward, and whether these IEEPA tariffs specifically will be legal or not. So stay tuned for that conversation. And so we realize that's going to have to probably be more than just our standard 30-minute session.
Yeah, that actually was a question. Do we expect the Supreme Court to announce a ruling on IEEPA sometime during the month of November? I mean, maybe.
Yeah. What I'm hoping for more than that is, we can have a clear discussion about, on November 7th, about what the future looks like once we've heard, a little bit more from the administration and a little bit more from the defense, or the other side, on why these tariffs should not be legal. And so once we hear some of the dialogue of the Supreme Court, the hope is that we will have some sort of sense of where they could or might go. It's never certain until they do their final votes. I don't have a timeline on that, but that's something that we'll definitely be discussing on November 7th.
Brilliant. Well, I think we maybe time for one last question, Ben, in the last 30 seconds or 45 seconds. There's a question here that you mentioned submitting private comment on USTR, and not sure about this one. BIS? Not sure what that, it seems a little ambiguous, but maybe you can.
Yeah, the Bureau of Industry and Security is the unit in the Department of Commerce in charge of the 232 tariffs. So those are the national security tariffs. They also have a process similar to the 301s, where they put out on the Federal Register the ability for the public to comment. And so you could submit comment there, and they have those details typically as a part of that you can reach out to staff privately about submissions. And if you don't see that, let us know, and we can help collect. information and submit it on your behalf to make it anonymous. I did see a question as well about Peru earlier on. I have not seen any discussions about a trade deal with Peru. I would say Peru has a pretty favorable tariff rate overall. I was looking at, it seems like they've got a 10% rate. So the incentive on their end may be less to come to the table and have a deal, but rather to just keep things status quo. I mean, 10% is the baseline. And they do have some stacking if you're going to do a 232 on top of that for, you know, the several categories we've discussed in the past, but typically they've got a pretty favorable rate compared to other countries. So
Right. Right. Well, we're running out of time here. Just wanted to make sure that if you do want to keep up to date on the tariffs, please do visit our website. We do try to stay on top of those in real time as much as possible. And we want to thank Rebecca again for joining us and providing us that insight. And Ben, thanks for taking more time to walk us through these updates. And of course, to all of you who tuned in this week, please keep an eye on the World Trade Center Utah's communication channels. And of course, like our website again, for any additional information, they do come quite frequently, and updates to the tariff dashboard, those also come frequently. And of course, look at our upcoming events. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to send us an email, and we'll drop you a line in response. But thank you and enjoy your weekend.